Welcome into another edition of the Summer Mailbag. I am Evan Rogers alongside Taylor Vippolis. Today we are talking about what we think are the biggest weak links on the UNC depth chart this season.
I'm gonna go. I don't like the term weak link. I like question mark because
Fair,
I think
fair.
going into training camp and going into the season, a lot of these guys are trying to prove themselves. And until Carolina goes against another team, it's hard to say like this is their weakness. So my biggest question mark is the offensive line because they're going into this season as a large unknown. They return less than 60 career starts on that offensive line, and about 50 of them are Willie Lampkin, who is already undersized for that guard position. And the coaching staff, I think, could have some kind of idea or feel for where they're going to be going into the season. But until it is that other team lined up across from you, it is hard to gauge. One returning starter. You have Austin Blasky, the projected starter at center, who only got 29 snaps last year at Georgia, 158 snaps in 3 years in Athens. And now he's going to see a drastic increase in playing time. You have Howard Sampson, who projects right now as the starting left tackle, a transfer from North Texas. He played in 2 games for North Texas, and now he's being relied upon to be most likely your starting left tackle. If it's Connor Harrell starting, he's protecting Connor Harrell's blind side, and this is a transfer from that group of five level. Then you have Travion Green, who played 41 snaps last year, most likely going to be the right tackle, who could be protecting Max Johnson's blind side. And then you have Ja'Kai Leftwich, the Georgia Tech transfer, who he graded out. I know Jason says Jason likes him a lot more than the Pro Football Focus grades have Leftwich at, but the Pro Football Focus grades still grade him out as a below average offensive lineman in the ACC. So that's for the most part your offensive line. I would say the plus on the offensive line and a reason to be excited when you are trying to take this glass half full approach. When you're talking about Travion Green, you're talking about Leftwich, and you're talking about Sampson. The pluses with them is their size, their length, and their frame. I have all their sizes listed out, and some of them I had to double check them because I've never seen them in person really. Travion Green, 6'7.5", 340. Ja'Kai
He,
Leftwich,
he's probably more than 340.
Ja'Kai Leftwich, 6'6", listed 311. Howard Sampson, 6'8", 325. So between if you have Green and you have Leftwich as that right side of your offensive line, that's a lot of mass for Omarion Hampton to run behind. And Omarion Hampton, when you are talking about your offensive line as one of the biggest question marks, I think some of that worry gets pushed aside with how good of a running back Omarion Hampton is. We're talking about a top five running back in the entire country. So this offensive line doesn't have to be a perfect offensive line. They just have to create enough holes for somebody like Omarion Hampton to kind of do the rest. And when you're talking about big boys that size, like they're going to be able to get in some people's way. It's a group where, but going back to kind of sandwich it is a group still where you're going into a week 1 game against Minnesota where most of the players up front will play more snaps in that one game than they did all of last year. And that's hard for it to not be a concern. And outside of that first five, you're looking at some depth pieces where you have Zach Greenberg, the D3 transfer, you have Malik McGowan, who's most likely just a depth piece, Jonathan Adorno, who's going to be in that guard rotation, but realistically at the ACC level, most likely just a depth piece. And then I think the where he's at now to where his ceiling could be, it's somebody like Zach Rice, who for a 5-star prospect frankly speaking, has shown you next to nothing. And when you look at some of the breakdowns for his play, I read Jason Staples' words like it's the Bible. And when he's talking technique and the some of the key words where if you're kind of just listening and it's playing in the distance, when some of the words you're hearing is sloppy and like lazy and needs to learn how to play with an edge and still waiting for that light bulb moment, maybe that light bulb moment will come, but those are also a lot of concerns for you. And this is somebody who you're talking about really isn't even in the conversation for being in that starting offensive line coming out of training camp. So especially with we've talked about it before on previous episodes, you're going to win and lose at the college game in the trenches. The fact that Carolina has less than 10 starts from everybody on the offensive line, not name Willie Lampkin, it's a huge concern. And I think the season largely is going to be determined by how they do and how they play.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the inexperienced part of this offensive line is going to be fascinating. I think there was a stat that I found a couple months ago talking about the career snap totals for Blasky, Sampson, and Trevion Green totals up to around 400, 450. Diego Pound's last season logged over 700 snaps at that left tackle position. So just the sheer inexperience is where those question marks arise. For me, I'm going to go on the defensive side and another position that I think outside of maybe one player, kind of like the offensive line, has it just a lot of unknowns, and that's the linebackers. You've got Power Echols back. He's shifting over to that top guy now with Cedric Gray off to the NFL. Amari Campbell's a guy that the UNC coaching staff have praised and liked. I mean, you saw him mentioned almost every other week during press conferences last season, but somehow only played about 120 snaps last year. So that's a guy who's just inexperienced. Then after that, it's just a bunch of unknowns. Is it Michael Short? Is it Caleb Lavalley? Is it Gibson McCray? I mean, you've got guys that pretty much have next to no experience at all. And it's just a position that's so vital that you saw how important Cedric Gray was to this team last year and how on a defense that already struggled, the question of what would UNC's defense look like if they didn't have Cedric Gray? Well, UNC is about to find that out this upcoming year. I also think the part of Power Eccles is interesting. I think, Power has become a really good player and he's improved every season, but he still has some warts. And are those going to be exposed when you don't have a guy like Cedric Gray right next to you at all times? So I think linebacker is a position where UNC cannot afford to have an injury there. And knowing how the substitutions have been over the past couple seasons, those are guys that are going to play almost every snap of every game, and they're going to have to. And if one of them goes down, UNC is going to be throwing in a player who may not even be on scholarship or even a guy who just doesn't have much experience in general. And that's just such a vital part to the defense that I think it's just something that could really tilt the season for UNC if there were to be an injury or something like that.
There's one name that I'm glad you mentioned, Gibson McCray. How many Carolina fans do you think are learning the name Gibson McCray? Because in the college football 25 game, it's you have to basically sub him out because
Somehow, yeah.
they have Power Echols listed as the third down linebacker. Because I had that same moment where I'm playing the game and I'm looking at this screen. I'm like, wait, where's Amari Campbell? Who is Gibson McCray? Is this one of the default players that they somehow didn't? And then I pull up the roster and Gibson McCray, there he is right there.